We live in a fast-paced and hectic world where it's easy to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and out of control. How do you manage all the competing pressures without losing sense of yourself? How do you stay focused enough to not only plot a path, but follow it? Welcome to Master Your Life, a show that offers inspiration, insight, and intelligence, as well as success stories from many walks of life that can show you how you can control your own destiny. Our knowledgeable and entertaining hosts and their guests give practical advice that you can use every day in the quest to master your life. Now, here are your hosts, Leah Mattinson and Dr. Howard Rankin.
Welcome to Master Your Life. I'm host Leah Mattinson, joined as usual by my wonderful co-host, Dr. Howard Rankin. Howard is the author of the upcoming book, I Think, Therefore I Am Wrong. And Howard's done lots of wonderful work in the world. And I will say for just a few years, because you're such a young fella. But he and I were chatting this morning prior to the show, and just about how we can really get caught up in the to-dos. And we encourage you on this show, of course, to think about what it is you want in your life and where it is you are right now. And sometimes the trap of that is you might get caught in doing a to-do list, as opposed to really experiencing real, true joy and bliss in your life. And Howard, you just had such a great commentary this morning. I'd love it if you'd share it in full with our listeners.
Okay, well, feel free to interrupt if I ramble on too long. But yeah, I was telling Leah an experience I had yesterday, and as you know, I'm really into the I think, therefore I'm wrong, and what's important, and consciousness really, and looking at what's important. So yesterday I was feeling in a pretty zen mood. I was very balanced. I felt very calm, and I had an appointment for a follow-up routine medical visit. And I went to see the doctor, and he came in. I've known him for a number of years, see him periodically. And he asked me how I was. And I said, I'm fine, but how about you?
Right.
Almost like I'm worried about you, which is interesting because, there are data that suggests that, in the U.S., at least 50% of doctors have burnout. Right. And what was interesting about that mindset, which sounds like it's sort of ironic that the patient is more concerned about the doctor than the other way around, is allowing yourself to be aware to the situation and choosing what you focus on, and not allowing the context or the constraints of what you're doing to totally grab your focus. Now, sometimes you have to do that, but unfortunately, we live in a world that tells you you've got to do all the time because that's the way to be successful.
Right.
Well, yeah, that is, but it's also the way to burn out. It's also the way to miss out on a lot, I think. And that what control is about for me, that reaching that sort of enlightened control, is to recognize you actually don't have any. We don't control life.
No, we don't.
We don't. Science and technology has given us this impression that we're so smart and clever. Okay, so we can take like sunshine and use it to grow energy. Yeah, that's great, and we're just using it, but we don't control the sun.
No. What was the response of your doctor when you asked him that? I'm curious.
Well, actually, it was interesting. If we'd had more time, I think it might have turned into a therapy session, actually. Right. He didn't say, oh, I'm great. He said, oh, and so I think I kind of maybe have hit on, the difficulty. Here's in the late afternoon on a busy day. I mean, it is an unenviable life, I think. Today to be a doctor. You're not the wise sage about the body. You got 10 minutes to see you, and then I got 20 other people I got to see in the next 2 hours. It's ridiculous. Right, it is ridiculous. Actually, what we're doing is we're giving the doctors problems, and I'm not sure we're giving the patients the best treatment. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's shown by your example is just the power of listening. Asking the question and listening. So it's not just doctors, it's worldwide, this whole commentary on loneliness and illness. Really, a lot of it is around just our disconnection and the not listening and not asking questions. So wrapped up in ourselves. Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, so wrapped up in ourselves. And I don't mean that necessarily in a narcissistic way, in a sort of unpleasantly narcissistic way. And we've discussed this, I think, on the show. Ego isn't necessarily narcissism. I like to think of the ego as the CEO trying to organize yourself so that
Right.
you're as, you're sort of as efficient as possible. But what happens if you stop doing that and focus somewhere else? What happens if you stop focusing on you and all the things you have to do and kind of get it right, whatever that is, and focus on, okay, I'm going to listen to the person, to the birds, to the sea,
Right.
to whatever. I'm going to focus there and put everything else aside.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a different experience. You have a totally different experience of life. And as I said to you earlier, I think one of the things that happens as you get older is you don't have so much of that to-do stuff. Perhaps you've retired and you're doing different things. And then you can almost by accident start to find this state, well, I don't have to do things. Well, what am I going to do today? Well, some people can some people can never stop. They can never stop. I live in Hilton Head. It's a lot of retired people, and I've known people who've retired from very successful positions, and they try to fill their day. I got to play golf. I got to do this. I got to do that. And it's almost like they can't operate unless they've got a lot of things to check off. And I personally think that's a sad commentary.
Right. And a lot of it is sheer indoctrination. From the time we're very young, we're taught to perform and produce. At least our generation was certainly, you got a pat on the back for the harder you worked and the more that you did and the more that you showed up and the more that you gave, of yourself. So with doctors, with coaches, I think with anyone working in community, with teachers, I mean, all kinds
Absolutely.
of CEOs, that are working, in North America for sure, 80 plus hours a week. And so there's all of this indoctrination and then support within all of those communities to act the same way, to behave the same way. Because if you don't, then there's something wrong with you. And you can be the black sheep also if you're, managing how you balance your work and life differently from other people. And there's a point when it's not only in maturity, but when you get a diagnosis of an illness is another time when you have these, you go, hang on a minute, like what in the world have I been doing here that has been detracting from my what do I even know what joy and bliss are? How would I even recognize them? So how I see the CEO, kind of the ego CEO, is also this magnificent, part of us, the magnificence of us. That if we just get into the CEO part, that we miss all the magnificence, except if we're doing administrative tasks like a CEO does.
Right.
So we have no appreciation internally for all the other glorious things that are, that make us human, and that humanity, it connects us through that humanity sort of piece of us is very shut down.
Yes, and of course you would know that better than almost everyone else, and you're exactly right. I think that's what happens, and almost any tough event, rock bottom, whatever that is for you, whether that's a diagnosis or whether that's a problem, is an opportunity to change your perception of the world and what you do. I don't think you're defined by what you do. I think you're defined by who you are. And, that's somewhat defined by how you act towards others and your level of consciousness of the world and yourself. And we're not taught that. But see, certainly we're not taught that in the West. Let's put it that way. That really has its roots more in Eastern tradition.
Right.
And I suspect it's more available there, although, they've been contaminated, if you will, by Western culture. And of course, a lot of those people object to that, and I totally understand that. And I think the answer here is balance. I'm not suggesting, we should just wander around all the day blowing off all the things we need to do because we don't want to do them and we want to go to the beach instead.
Right.
It's about doing them in that mindful way. And that's the problem. If you are always in the to-do mode, which is just getting things done, you're never appreciating what you're doing, and you're not appreciating the task, and you probably won't, depending on what the task is, but the more sophisticated it is, you won't do it very well. And I use the example of you. I mean, I'm sure that you are an outstanding presenter when you talk to people about terminal illness for all sorts of reasons. But I'm sure you're not there looking at your notes and saying, okay, I got to do that, and I got to say that. Oh, I missed that point. I'll go back. You're not doing that. And if you were, it would be not a very good presentation, as you know.
Right.
You're there speaking from the heart, from the mind. You're reaching out to people. That's what you're doing. You're in that moment, and in that moment, you're giving your best, which is probably awesome.
Yeah, and which drives my marketing people nuts. Like,
well, but
in a nice little box for you. I'm like, well, no, I don't know what I'm going to say today.
But that's a very important part, because we live in a marketing culture, right?
Yes.
And a marketing culture tries to, at least with their clients, or actually even their potential clients, i.e. their customers, try to manipulate them. You know, an advertisement is not a spontaneous event. It's been thought through about, and we've talked about this many times, it's thought for how can we hook people? How can we do this? You know, I can't imagine any advertisement being done joyously. It's a manipulation, right? And so let's hope it's not done joyously.
Right. Joyously. Correct. Yes. It is you know, it's funny, the couple things that you've said is, you know, that when we get out of sync with what we're supposed to be doing that brings us joy, or that we stop attending to the administrative tasks. So I think about, I can't remember who the saying was by, but it was like, if you're called to be a street sweeper, sweep the streets as if all the angels in heaven are singing.
Correct.
And so when you're, whatever the thing is that you do in the world, that then it can be either something that's paid or unpaid. That's kind of irrelevant. But when you're actually drawn to doing it, you do it with excellence, and your spirit really is engaged, and it's a timeless sort of effort to do the thing. So you'll say, "Oh, I completely lost track of time." Yes, because you're in the flow state. And again, people go, "Well, I can't get paid for that," you know, or I should only get paid for that. So it's like that all or nothing piece, and I think there's the happy medium of you know, walking the middle road and getting the things done that you need to do. But the other thing that we get caught up in, the task I hear all the time in my coaching practice, I'm doing so many things and I'm so exhausted. And I go, so what is it that you're doing all day? And people can list off many, many things. And I say, so you're doing all this stuff for other people. And meanwhile, the person who's sitting in the chair from across from me is struggling with, you know, an eating disorder, you know, overweight, got, you know, addictions issues, whatever's going on. I say, so what is it that you're doing for yourself during this? You're complaining that you're doing all the time for other people, that it's causing you all this stress. But what is it you're actually doing for and to yourself while you're doing this giving, this apparent giving of yourself? And we've got this sort of thing twisted up in our heads that it's incorrect thinking about. Yeah. And so how do we help people to untwist that sort of thing where it's, you know, it's like this internal doing, it is what shows up externally. You know, so how do we get untwisted from that?
Well, I think there's several answers to that. One is, and perhaps people don't want to hear this, but one is not to get too caught up or caught up at all, excuse me, with materialism. It's an illusion. You know, if I just work harder, I'll make more money, then we can do this. You're never satisfied.
Right.
With materialism, you're never satisfied. There's always something else more that you want. And if you're focusing on wants rather than needs, you're not going to be terribly satisfied. You might get a momentary satisfaction when you buy a nice new car and you're driving around, but that there's a price to pay for that. And the price to pay for that, frankly, is losing yourself and not living life to the fullest. And it is not a coincidence that all the studies on happiness show that, you know, above a certain, you know, like in the US is like $70,000 a year, pretty low. Yes. Above that, money has very little impact on happiness, very little. What does have an impact around the world on happiness is anxiety and stress, right? And so think about that. If you're stressing yourself out to make money so you can be happy in a very illusory sense, does that make any sense, really? It doesn't, but that message is all around us, and it's what we're inculcated with. And the fact is, in many ways, simpler is happier. And the studies show, the classic statement, miserable millionaires and happy peasants. That's the research on happiness, is that people who live simple lives are way more happy than people in the treadmill and rat race.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things happening. And we see some good examples of people who are breaking out of that sort of, the one or the other sort of thing. So Tim Ferriss is one I talk about him quite often, and I'm not even sure what he's doing right now. But at one time, he was one of the people that I was watching along his career path, because he's done lots of crazy stuff. But one of the things that he did was he had lots and lots of stuff, and then he got rid of it all. And that he, got an apartment in some city that was easy, close to an airport, and sort of now, I don't know what he's doing right now, but he went through a span of time where he was just traveling all the time and learning. Travel and learn with a backpack. So his blogs were mainly focused on, well, how do you fit 5 pounds worth of stuff in your backpack that's this big, and then and how do you do your medical stuff overseas so that it doesn't cost you anything? So got very much into that. So he's still wealthy, So I think that we see people now. We're seeing examples of people who can manage both. They can manage both wealth and that sort of simpler, minimalistic lifestyle. And they understand, that all of those things are the albatross around your neck. If you have too much stuff, then it starts taking up your time and energy, versus these things that you alluded to right at the beginning of the show about, like, what really brings us joy is this connecting with other people. And if we're so busy changing the oil in our 52 cars that are sitting in our 3-story garage, it, might take away from that.
That is exactly, because you can always pay somebody to do that. But the point is, but it's still up taking your focus. I think that's exactly right. And I have known people. I knew one gal who lived in a car for a year.
Yes.
And she said in some ways it was incredibly liberating. All my stuff was in a suitcase. That's all I had.
Yes.
Very liberating.
Yes.
I knew another woman who lived in a very expensive house and what have you, got divorced. I met her a couple of years later, and she was living in almost like a trailer home in the middle of nowhere. She said, "I've never been happier."
Yes. Well, and I've gone through that experience, a couple of times of being the, having lots and then going, well, it's not worth it. The having lots is not worth whatever the cost or the sacrifice, the thing that you're sacrificing. So I joke around that I'm selling my soul to the devil for $3,000 a month.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm sure there are millions of people who can probably relate.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And it is freeing to have. So I recently, like November of last year, sold my home, and I live a very, what I call nomadic lifestyle, but it allows me to travel. I can stay with friends. I can, pop up a TV studio wherever I want, and it does allow a lot of freedom. So I don't have 10 cars. I have one. I love my vehicle. I take good care of it, but it's, I get to spend time with my grandkids because I'm not spending 50 hours in my garden, which I used to spend. Like that was a pretty normal thing over the span of a month, just because there's so much to do.
Right.
Yeah. So while it looks noble when you start out on these, things that you really want to do, and then I will speak for myself. I get way too immersed in it, and then go, hold on, like what? And come up for air, and go, what the world is? What am I doing here? And then, kind of collecting myself back to the thing that I started with that brought me joy is no longer bringing joy to me. It's sucking the life out of me. And so how do I actually get back into what you said, balance? How do I get back into that balance?
And it is about balance. We're not suggesting everyone quit their jobs and go backpacking and, go bankrupt. But, there's a balance there. And the point about that is you have got to know how to be in the flow and just experience. I mean, you've got to know that. If you don't know that, then everything will be just check off the to-do list, right? That's all it'll be. And relaxation will be just another version of that. I'm going to choose what I'm going to do, but I got to watch the show for an hour, and you're missing out, I think, on experience, and you're missing out on the ability to manage the things that happen in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Because checking off a to-do list gives you some misguided sense of control, right? Oh, well, I've done that. Okay, I had a good day. I did 23 things. I'm exhausted and I don't feel very good, but at least I did that. But what happens when something comes up that you can't control or don't seem to have much control over? Yes. Like maybe a terminal diagnosis or a loss of a job or whatever it is. Then you're going to panic because you don't have the mindset from which to manage that situation.
Right. Where's the list? How do I make a list for this?
7 things you need to do when faced with a crisis. Yeah. Well,
I laughed so hard when that came out. My mom and I opened the book and went, wow, I think it's missing a couple chapters. Just saying.
But it's not the what, it's not the what, it's how do you do that? How do you do those things? Right? Yes. And you're a great example of that. Okay, well, you get a terminal diagnosis. Okay, look up the things you need to do and then just go do them. Well, it's how you do them that is going to make the difference.
Yes.
Right?
The spirit in which things are done.
Yeah, yes. Because that's not just about performance that you're going to do it better.
Right.
It's that process that is giving you a sense of control.
Right. And the really the joy that comes from these moments of, it's just like what's the word I'm looking for? It's like you're really paying attention to something and it's bringing you joy, reverence, like the reverence for the learning or the experience or whatever it is that is happening. So the reverence for the radio show. I feel so grateful all the time for our time together. And we say that often, to each other. This is such a wonderful thing for us, our friendship, our camaraderie, our challenge that we bring to each other, sort of that, laughing at our silliness and things like that. And, the reverence that we have for our children, the reverence that we have for our families, the reverence that we have for our grandchildren. And that when you look at it like it's a gift, and be really grateful for it, it changes it completely. It changes the energy of the whole exchange of whatever your energy is. So if your energy, I'll say to clients, if your energy is that of a cancer cell, right? And what do you expect that you're going to be experiencing moment to moment, day to day, in your interactions with other people? Whereas if you're this really brilliant energy, what's that bring? Because you're going to be here regardless. So how you do it.
Here's a compliment for you. I haven't mentioned this to you before. As you know, I'm writing some stuff on Buddhism, which I'm finding really interesting.
Oh, yes.
And actually, this is great. There's a story of Buddha who approaches a sick man. And what does he say to him? Exactly what you have said. Do you want to be well? That's his question. Doesn't heal him. He just says to him, do you want to be well? And you've said that many times. That's the question you ask yourself and ask other people when you're dealing with. Do you want to be well? And I think you're living proof of what happens when you ask yourself the right question. And in this case, that particular question.
Yes.
Do you want to be well? And wanting to be well means really engaging in it, not reading the 7 things you need to do to get well, but really owning it, taking it on, let it infuse.
Right. And don't be afraid of your answer. Like, love your answer. We're so about answering that and going, yes, like, yes. Do you want to be well? Yes. We get so animated about things that are completely like have no effect on our life. But when we're asked something like that, we're afraid to actually jump in because what if something else happens? We're so future forecasting all the time that we don't just say what we want, so that is thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Because
well,
I don't even realize actually how much I do that in my own head or with clients, but I do it a lot. Yeah, definitely.
and you haven't even had a headache for the last 20 years. So,
Yeah, it's been a long time, long time.
yes.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's very, very important. You can find happiness and joy in anything. You're talking about the street sweeper. Okay.
Yes.
Well, we could rename the street. If we really wanted to get into, the advertising marketing world, we can rename him a public health consultant because, he's cleaning up the dirt from the road, which is very important. Okay.
It
He's
is.
not just a street sweeper, and let's dismiss him because, he probably doesn't have any education and he's an idiot.
Right.
He's actually doing something important, and he might be the most gracious, sweet, giving person in the world, and you might interact with him and have that moment of joy.
Right. And the rate that doctors are burning out, a lot of those guys might be street sweepers. So don't prejudge because they might be going, I would rather sweep the street than do any more of this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm done.
But, unfortunately, we live in this marketing world where celebrity and success, is defined a certain way, which is, by money and how many people, read about you and all that.
Yes.
Which is very artificial.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's around us. We need to forget that. We need to forget that.
Mm-hmm.
Where control, I think, or appreciation and joy and happiness comes in, is living as much of your time as you can, and certainly some of it, in this mode of being in the moment, focusing on what is there, and just appreciating it without trying to manipulate it, contort it, make it something it isn't. Just be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's hard. The thing that we have evolved into is getting further and further away from that,
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm sure our listeners or watchers will, it's easy to sit here and do that if you say it fast. Say it
right.
quick. But the actual practical application of these, moments of reverence when you're up against something really challenging, how do we get quiet in a still place and be able to actually listen to our CEO and then make decisions from that, and to also be able to look at ourselves with a sense of, instead of punishment about the decisions that we've made in the past, when you look back and you go, oh man, that was just what was I thinking? So see, but I changed it because I went, what was I thinking? As opposed to going, wow, you're an idiot. I do a lot of the, wow, what was I thinking? And find great humor in my own continued poor decision making, because there's some things that I make poor decisions though, or whatever. I go, what am I doing?
Haven't we all? Okay, and part of that is, I think it's very important to own the responsibility of the decision, but that doesn't have to come with sort of gut-wrenching, lifelong guilt and remorse. Yes. You're a human being. Yeah. You're a human being. Mm-hmm. We're all going to do dumb things. That's just taken for granted. Mm-hmm. But having the consciousness of making a dumb thing, now what do you do? Well, I don't think the answer to that is continue to make a dumb decision by beating yourself up about it. It's what are you going to do about it? How are you going to respond? How do you learn? How does this experience take you to a different level of consciousness and awareness? And if you do that, God bless you, because that's the best thing to do.
Yes.
And again, a function of a society that focuses on your worth in terms of money or whatever, status. You'll say, well, I can never be a, doctor now. And so, oh, God, I'm a failure. No. You can. The street sweeper can still be a magnificent success. Right. Depending on how they lead their lives,
Yes. Yeah. There's lots of examples of that in my life, of people who are, I think, just the most compassionate, giving, and they live really satisfactory lives. My parents, I often mention them on the show because they're just, they are, in my mind anyway, the example of that from the time they were young. They were very just giving. They give to lots of different things of themselves. And even now they have, its company comes over to their house all the time, and my mom is baking things all the time. So they're either feeding people or being fed or cleaning snow off people's driveways, or my mom just took up line dancing. So it's this whole thing of communication or community. And my mom's 72, but it's going and encouraging other people as well, right? So there's the other piece of, she just
Absolutely.
went to express joy in dancing and being able to do that, and to be part of this little community. But she has people that will say, wow, like, you're doing that? Oh, that's great. Maybe I should try it.
Do it. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So you're not trying to manipulate anyone to do anything. You're doing what brings you joy, and other people get curious. They go, how do I do that?
I do that. That is exactly right. Yeah. And so it's not just your benefit to get to that level of consciousness. You're then an example for other people who can say, wow, man. And I'm sure that when people come over, your mom isn't saying, oh, God, I got to bake them a cake. She is right at it, and she's loving every minute of it, and she's thinking about how much she's going to give to them. And
yes, that's totally her. Completely. Yeah. They'll serve, 30 plus people for Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving. And for every single person, there's usually a dish that means something to them.
Oh my gosh.
Like whether it's dessert or, however the turnips are done, or it's amazing really how she continues to hold that as an important thing. And my parents also, and other people I'm sure have this example in their life, but I have twin cousins that are 2 months older than me. So,
okay.
So when they were born, they were handicapped though. They were too long into term. So they were over 7 pounds each and oxygen deprived. So these twins came out and they were mentally handicapped and physically handicapped. So they stayed at home only for a few years because the girls got quite violent and too hard to handle. So they went to live in an institution, and they would come home, every so often and ride horses at my aunt and uncles, et cetera, et cetera. But my mom and dad were one of the few people that would go over and visit, go and help to get them, on horseback, go and help feed them, and my uncle and aunt. So over the span of, I'm 50. So over the span of years and years and years, this has gone on, this relationship and this love. And my mom would buy the girls their pajamas for Christmas, and they always loved. Couldn't really talk, but you could tell that they loved these pajamas from Auntie Sharon, and that she always took the time to pick them out really nice feeling ones. So I would go shopping with her, and we would go through, and she'd feel them all, right? And she goes, well, I think Lorraine would like this, and I think Maureen would like this, and it always wrapped them beautifully, just like she wrapped everybody else's gifts. And so just this whole time and attention and reverence for life that my parents showed on a continuous basis really did impact how I think about other people and how I think about life. And I was really grateful that they've had that influence on me, because I see the gifts in other people easily because of that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that other people have had that or lost it, or they've lost it. They've had that example in their life, and then they, we get caught up in the trying to perform, trying to do stuff, trying to meet some sort of metric, and we lose the plot on what actually is bringing us happiness.
Correct. And, well, I want to meet your mom and your dad. Yeah. Perhaps we should have them on the show. I don't know, but
we should. My mom's so shy.
Awesome.
Shy.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah,
well, in contrast, and I've talked about it on the show before. In contrast, my mom was somewhat like that. She had kind of a tough childhood, sort of semi-abandoned, and she was a very determined woman, and I got my perseverance from her. My dad was a really smart guy, but he would stress out over everything. Change the light bulb. Oh God, I got to change the light. Yes, exactly. He was the sort of example of exactly what we've been talking about, in terms of being caught up in the to-do, and if he couldn't get it done, his anxiety would go way up. And as a result, he died of a stroke at 61.
Yeah.
And he was a great guy. But it took me, a psychology degree and and I started to realize this and not be able to articulate this in my teens, what was really going on with him and in our family. And, my mom was his protector. Oh, don't tell dad, don't tell dad. Oh. And I was sort of the peacemaker and, and I would go, I remember young age going on, what mood's dad in? Is I don't want to say anything that's going to upset him, So, they contributed to my psychology career, but it took me at least after the awareness of it, a good 30 years to change. And it's really hard to change the impact on me of not being the same. And I still have to be conscious of that, but I've got a lot better because that's what we're talking about. I personally understand that. There's part of me that automatically will start to get anxious. No, wait a minute. Don't need to go there. Yes. Stop.
Yes. And I would say mine is, I have that too, Howard, but it's not from parents, it's from society. It's the cultural, cultural pressure, really, because we only got nurtured for so long. And then.
Yeah. And, the world is so fast. It's so stressful. There's so much coming at us. When do we take time to drop out? And we should perhaps, given we've got like 10 minutes left, we should talk about how do people practically find this peace. And you've got to practice it. It's, in our culture, it's unlikely to come to you naturally. You've got to practice it. Right. And that, and I think the mindfulness exercises, whether that's different sorts of meditation or deep breathing, is a great, great place to start and continue. You've got to slow your mind down. And you have the ability to do that. It's just been taught to rev, 100 miles an hour all the time. Yes. You got to bring it back to, 5 miles an hour or even stopped altogether. And if you can't do that, well, that's why there's so much anxiety and stress. You've got to be able to do that. And because it's not natural in our society now, you have to practice it.
Yeah. And so some of the ways of practicing that definitely are turning off your TV. So all of the sedated sorts of behaviors where people go, well, I don't have time to, and what we're talking about is contemplation, really. And meditation is something that people struggle with. So I invite people to, I don't know if your mind actually does shut down. So that one for a lot of people is a big struggle.
Yeah, I don't think it's about shutting down and you fall asleep then. What we're talking about is bringing your level of focus way down, okay? Yes. And one simple thing is just focus on one thing. It could be, where your butt's hitting the seat or, where your foot's hitting the floor or what sounds you can hear. But when you're doing that, like the sounds you can hear, you're not trying to remember them or work out what they are. You're just experiencing them, right? Yeah. You're just experiencing them. And that takes practice, because in our world you hear a sound, oh, what's that? Oh, I think it must be the person next door moving, no, you don't want to interpret it. That's the problem. I think therefore I'm wrong. So don't bother with that. You've got to get to the point of just experiencing things for their sake and not trying to do anything about them, right?
So what if I am experiencing something that's annoying me? I've put my focus on something that's annoying me. What should I do? because that's part of the trap, as we go, okay, well, now I focused on the barking dog and the barking dog.
Right. Okay. So the barking dog, boy, that dog is a pain. And why don't those people control it? And I'm going to talk to the home association. Yeah. Okay. We can do that. Or you can say, that's a barking dog. Yeah. That's a barking dog. There's nothing more to it than the fact
that it's a barking dog.
Barking dog. And you can make up any story you want, but we're not going to do that. That's the whole point. Right?
And I think the other thing too is if it annoys you that much and our mind creates what we focus on, then focus on something else. Like you don't have to get into the why it's annoying. You just go, that's annoying, and I'd rather think about my breathing.
Right. And distract yourself. And what you'll find with practice is, you can, and I do think deep breathing is focused breathing is a great way to start. Certainly one of the techniques I use. what you'll find is eventually you won't be even hearing the barking dog.
No.
Right? Now, that's the space you want to get to. You're
Mhm.
just into the experience of your breathing.
Yes. Yeah. And the other little exercise that I use with clients too is imagine that you're in a canoe and you're floating down a
Right.
river,
That's
and there's
right.
all these things floating past you. It doesn't mean that you need to dip your rod into the pond and pull
Right.
out whatever is in your boat is what you decide is going to be in your boat. So if you'd just like to have a nice serene float down the river and your boat is going to stay in the center, you don't need to do anything. Just go with the flow. But so your only responsibility is to let the fish go by you. Let them go by you, and just
Right.
enjoy the
Right.
enjoy the
That's
trip.
right. Yeah. The one version of I know is sitting on a riverbank watching things go by,
Yeah.
and you watch them go by, and then they go out and they disappear, and you watch the next thing go by. And
Yes.
you are not trying to create a narrative, a story, or anything about them. Oh, look, there's a fish. Oh,
Right.
look, there's a guy fishing. Oh, look, there's a shark.
Oh, look, there's a mermaid.
There's a mermaid. Oh, look at that. Okay. Look, but I'm not going to engage in it. I'm just going to experience it. And you have to practice that to get to the next level where where you can use it in critical areas of your life.
Right.
Because, it's a bit like, and the problem is people, you don't want to learn how to put out a fire when you're faced with a fire, because it's not going to work. You need to learn those skills beforehand, so when faced with a fire, you have some practice, and it's more likely that you will do that.
Right. And so what that looks like is that when you practice that calm sort of state of being, or being able to detach yourself from all the emotional stuff that's going on out there, that when something comes at you, whatever it is, if it's an angry boss, or your kid's got a bad report card, or, the million things that happen, somebody cuts us off in traffic, then instead of having the automatic, well, blah, 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 and I think about it like garbage, like it's gray garbage, blah, blah, blah. Instead of that, you're just nirvana. You're very peaceful. You're very centered. And not only is that good for you physiologically, right? Your physiology doesn't respond. It doesn't get lit up. It doesn't. So you don't create this neural pathway it's almost addictive, the hits that we take all the time.
Right.
So we're looking for this little stim, and we don't even realize how much stimulation we have in a day. So that detaching from it, not having an emotional sort of reaction to everything. What do you think is the difference between not only what we experience physiologically, but what our children see?
Oh, huge.
It's like,
I mean,
mom
you're
and
talking
dad
about
are losing their minds.
right. You're talking about the most important, maybe one of the most important skills, which is emotion management. Oh, there goes my anger. Let me look at it go there. Right? No, I'm so bad.
Right.
And so part of this level of consciousness is, and because you have to take this in context, and but your angry boss comes at you.
Right.
You could just look and nod, or you could say, "Man, what's up with you today? I'm worried about you."
Yes.
Rather than, "Oh, why are you being mad?" and getting defensive, and now you're in a big fight.
Right. And so this is where sometimes the imagination does come in handy, though, to create a narrative that's different than the narrative that you're creating about whatever's going on in your day. And my example to clients, again, is when you're driving through traffic, because this seems to be a big one for people, is they're just mad all the time. I go, well, what if you think about it, like frame it this way? Somebody has there's nobody gets on the road in the morning, first of all, that intentionally wants to be in an accident. Right. There's nobody that gets on the road and goes, I'm going to run into somebody today. Right. That's how my day is going to go. So people do all kinds of, not good driving behavior. So what about you say to yourself, oh, maybe that person's in labor, bringing somebody in labor to the hospital. That's maybe why they're in such a big rush. That person is like my mom and dad driving, they're 70 and they're just doing their best. Oh, I bet you that person's GPS isn't working. And I know I've had that happen in the middle of traffic where you're just going, oh, I think I'm going to get somewhere. And then all of a sudden something happens with your map. You go, oh. Yeah, so it's like cut other people the same slack as you would want to have cut to you, that you would want, if you made a bad move in traffic, that you wouldn't want people pointing at you going, you're an idiot, what's the matter with you? You want them to know that that was not intentional, and that you're either, distracted with something, you just didn't see them, or maybe you're in a rush, trying to get somewhere. But just that extending grace to other people can put you in a state of peace.
Yes, and also to yourself. I mean, driving is a great example. And, as growing up, I drove in London, which is, when you drive in a big city, it's not a good thing. And I actually came to the conclusion, because this happened all the time. So I came to the conclusion, well, I may cut them some slack, I may not, it doesn't matter. But I'm not going to let that guy give me a stroke. Okay.
Right.
I'm just not, I just don't want the 230 over 160 because of this guy. For whatever reason he's got, I'm just not going to go there. Right.
Right. Yes.
And again, it's that sort of consciousness instead of just getting caught up in the habitual.
Right.
Hammer on the horn, or worse yet, as we had some examples, pull out a gun. So that's the level of control. It's recognizing that people are caught up in this world.
Yes.
And what we're trying to do is have a different level of consciousness about it. And when you do, you'll be amazed what that can do for you.
Yes. And we know that everyone's capable of this because we are. So, laughing at ourselves, and that we know that everyone has the same capacity. So it's just really, I think, getting that an understanding and some help and insight sometimes. So we're looking forward to the book that you're working on. And you have many books that you work on. So anyone who wants to check out Howard's work, please go to his website, psychologywriter.com. And for anyone who's looking for coaching and mentorship around wellness or community and dealing with chronic and terminal illness, I invite you to come to leahmattinson.com and sign up for one of our upcoming wellness webinars. And until next week, Howard, thank you so much for your time and your insight, intelligence, and inspiration. As usual, we invite everyone to mind your mind. Have a wonderful week, everyone.
Thank you for being a part of our program today. Master Your Life with Leah Mattinson and Dr. Howard Rankin has been a presentation of Real Life Training, Inc. Join us next time on Master Your Life, helping you to discover the very best of you.